When you don't take time to look at it through other people's eyes. Take some time and reflect on what you believe in your soul. Cause that is the key to life. You gotta let the negativity go.
Hello and welcome back to the WhatTheFox podcast with your hosts, Lindsay Fox and Amber Ross. This month, we are working through and empowering a theme of change makers and talking with folks who are set on making change in their communities and the world as a whole. And today, Lindsay and I have a wonderful guest with us today. And Lindsay, I'd love for you to share a little bit about Jenice.
Yes, I am so excited to have Jenice on. She is not only a longtime friend, but she is a proud Latina who began as the executive director of a nonprofit organization in North Carolina back in 2013. And she has focused on bilingualism, multiculturalism, and leadership within the Latinx community. So as a whole, I feel like her role, she is the definition of a change maker. So we're definitely going to get into that.
Yes.
So Jenice has been in the education arena for over 10 years and has made it her mission to be a part of changing the status quo for the Spanish-speaking population and pushes for language access and opportunities for this community. Her professional and personal work is guided by the desire to see more women and people of color lead in the field of education. Jenice enjoys trips to the beach, spending time outside, relaxing with her friends and family, and having dance parties with her little girl. Do you want to do a shout out to your little baby girl, by the way, Jenice?
Yes, my little Eva. I think, that's part of this conversation, really. Well, not part of it, most of it, right? Like why I do the work is really to influence her and show her and be an example for her, so it's, she's my sweet little 4-year-old that thinks that she's 30. So, it's a
preach it.
She gets it honest. Let's be real. She gets it honest.
Yeah, she is a mess.
I love how these tiny humans can come into the world and completely pivot our plans, our passions, and really put the gas pedal to the metal in how we want to change things.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
She very much says that.
And I think a part of, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I love the background. I love the history, Jenice. I'm super thrilled to talk with you today, but I have to ask, Lindsay, this is a common theme, right? You meet some of the most outstanding humans on the planet. So I want to hear the story. How did Jenice and Lindsay meet?
It's true. I do meet some amazing humans, and Jenice is absolutely one of those amazing humans. So we can talk about how we met, and you can just chime in at any point, Jenice. We actually were bridesmaids to the same person. There was 10 or 11 of us. It's probably the only wedding I've actually liked because we all got along. And it was just amazing because Jenice and I met, and it was just kind of love at first sight with all of us in terms of the bachelor, but I was going to say bachelorettes. Oh my gosh, guys.
The bridesmaids.
No,
we acted like bachelorettes.
I know. And a whole weekend of spending time together, which was just absolutely amazing.
Yes. And so with that, typically you would just spend the weekend together, for whatever, but for the wedding festivities as a whole. But we all connected so much that we just started to make an effort to see each other once a year. And we designated this time and coined the term Twatfest.
Okay, I love it.
I know we're very professional here, but so we used to have Twatfest every year, and that's basically where Jenice and I just really kind of maintained our friendship and would kind of dabble in between. And when we started talking about change makers for this month's theme, I was like, that is totally Jenice.
Yes. That's awesome. I love that y'all founded that friendship, and decided that you were going to be intentional to make space every single year, because I imagine there's 10 to 11 bridesmaids. I'm sure all of you did not live in the same area. So it has to be there has to be some significant work that goes into the planning and the orchestrating.
Oh God. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there was like people in South Africa, Italy, Spain, Seattle. I like me in Boston. Janice
Yeah.
was local at the time to the
Yep.
Greensboro area. And
Hmm.
so it was just, we were from all over, and it was just amazing to see all of us come together and all of us clicked. We all kind of have that same vibe of
Yeah.
appreciating different cultures. And
Yeah.
frankly, that's what Janice does for a living even now, right? It's like really
Hmm.
honing in on that cultural piece.
Yes. No, and I think one of the beauties is like that all of the women were such great, just a beautiful, amazing, strong women. And I think that's also like what brought us together and like there was a bond there of like, we all support that type of woman, So it was beautiful, a beautiful experience for us. And I'm so glad I got
Speaking
to meet
of,
Lindsay.
yeah, right. Likewise, I would love, Janice, if you, whenever you say that type of woman, because like
Yeah.
I know you were all about women empowerment and not just leadership, but women empowerment. So I would love for you to comment whenever you say like that type of woman, and especially the kind
Yeah.
that you tend to advocate for and support. Can you kind of paint a picture for our audience to depict what that looks
Yeah.
like?
I think, it's such a layered thing, I think, for me, right? When I think about women and I think about history and then I just how we've evolved over, centuries and decades of like fighting for our own space, right? I think when I think about powerful women, I think about women of all sorts, right? That have these goals in mind. And not I a lot of times we like to create parallels between like careers and that associate that with like leadership and power. But no, I think what I see a powerful woman, I think about the individuality, the authenticity, the being able to show up as your true self, right? I think that to me is a powerful woman, right? And every single one of those women that we got to be in community with, right, had this individuality and this authenticness about themselves that when
Hmm.
they showed up as their true self, no matter what it was. And of course, I mean, all of them have amazing backgrounds, amazing lives that, are still, on their journey of where life is going to take them. But I think that piece of just really having space to show up as you, is just amazing. And I love to see that. And I love to, and I, sometimes I like kind of trip up on the word empowerment because I feel like, it's important as women for us to support one another, right? And so that in itself is empowerment. And so like it's not necessarily like I'm trying to empower you, but more I'm here to support you no matter where you are on your journey in life, right? And so that's,
Yes.
yeah. I don't know if that answered the question, but
Yes, no, it's an awesome answer because you're hitting the nail on the head. It's just about showing up for each other,
Mhm.
rooting each other on.
Mhm.
We're here to support one another. It's not about competing.
Right.
But it's also, and especially in your story, it's also making sure that every woman has an
That's right.
opportunity. It's
That's
about
right.
making sure that there's a level of equality and equity
Mhm.
in the
Yep.
process to make sure women of color are also a part of this
Yeah.
discussion of empowerment and leadership because
Yeah.
they have a really specific role in society that is so, oh gosh, I want to say like understated in terms of like what like people don't understand yet, at least in the corporate world. I don't think we're there
Mhm.
yet, but I think we're moving in that direction.
Agree.
But the
Mhm.
value of having women of color in leadership is so
Mhm.
powerful. And I would love to hear you kind of say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, being in the nonprofit sector, from the very beginning, one of the things that I noticed immediately was that a lot of the time I was the only Latina in the room, for example. And that in itself was one of those moments, and over the last few years, the words like imposter syndrome have come up a lot in like
Mhm.
corporate
Hmm.
world or with women in business or women in the workforce. And I don't know if that's exactly how I want to define it anymore. I think at one point I definitely was like, oh, I'm suffering from imposter syndrome. But more was that, when you are a woman of color in leadership and in spaces where historically you didn't belong,
Mhm.
there is this sense that you're constantly trying um to make sure that you prove yourself, at least, and I'm speaking for me individually, because maybe other people's experience isn't quite like this, but like I always felt like I was trying show that, yes, I made my room at the table, even when you didn't want to invite me to it, And so that in itself is like, when I think about that experience, and still something that happens from time to time, right? Where like, I look around and I'm like, wow, I'm the only Latina here. And then I'm probably going to be the one that really disrupts the space, and, your typical way of saying things. And like, here we go. There's another time that I'm going to be like, actually, that shit ain't right. Like, I don't care what
Yes.
I was
And
going to say what
please.
you mean about disrupting the space, because I think what you actually mean is setting the record straight. But go ahead. Let's go a little bit deeper into that.
And it's like, I laugh sometimes at, like, in my head, right? Because I already know those moments that are about to come, that I'm just like, damn it, I'm gonna have to show my
Here
ass,
we go.
like, right now, like, I'm gonna have to let them know, like, y'all got this all twisted. Like, no, that's not how you need to look at this, right? And I think that happens often with women in leadership, and then particularly women of color. And when you work with community, it's a whole nother layer too, because, in the nonprofit sector, there was a lot of this white savior complex, right? I have this amount of money. I'm going to come into this community and I'm going to fix this problem. I'm going to fix this, right? Where now I think philanthropy is changing, where people are changing relative, right? Where it's like, no, that's we're not saving anybody. We're supposed to be investing in community so that the community itself changes, right? Because the community itself has the tools, has the answers, has the solutions. So I think that's when you bring women into certain spaces, and particularly women of color into certain spaces, like, there is going to be disruption, because our perspective is completely different.
And it's so valuable.
I was going to say,
so
you have to have that disruption. If we continue to do things the same way we've always done them, nothing changes. And that's just completely insane. So take up the space, make the disruption, like, do the thing.
Yeah.
I would love to go back to kind of the beginning of your journey, Jenice. So now that our audience has a better understanding of like what you're doing to some degree, because we haven't totally gotten into it, but yes, I would love for you to share how you entered into this space, because you have an interesting story in terms of that segue of going from this one career and then into this career. And I'd love if you could share not only what that was like, but also that moment that occurred with you and your mother, where you kind of like were able to say, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. So, let's see. I always knew that I wanted to be in education, like, from early on. Like, I actually have a journal from when I was like in elementary school, that in the back I had like my 10-year plan, and I was like, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go to the University of NYU. I'm going to become a choreographer. I'm going to open this dance school. First of all, I dance okay. Like, I could, I have a rhythm, but like, I am no choreographer. And then, as life went on, I always made my brothers be like my students. We'd play school. And in high school, I had an opportunity to do the early childhood track. And I was at a daycare. And then I started getting familiar with children with disabilities. And I was like, I'm actually kind of interested in this. And I asked my school if I could actually intern in the special ed room at our school, where a lot of the children with severe disabilities were in. And they said yes. So I started doing that. And I fell in love with special education and children with disabilities. So I started tutoring children with autism 3 to 4, went to school. I'm a military brat. So my family's last station was Fayetteville, North Carolina. So I call Fayetteville, North Carolina home. And my dad, he was going to Iraq. My brother, or he was going to Saudi Arabia. I forgot where he was going, but it was after he retired. It was like a contract. And anywho, my dad asked me to stay home. My parents asked me to stay home. I stayed home, went to Fayetteville State my freshman year. Then second year, I moved to UNCG, and I studied special education. And there, I really started emphasizing in how are we supporting the Latino community with children with disabilities, because there wasn't very much information. So, when you have this language barrier on top of this real need within the education system, like, what do you do, right? And it's very different for communities that come to this country to navigate the education system. And even for people who are from here, the education system is complicated. in a state like North Carolina too, where every district kind of has its own rules for certain things. So anyways, I started teaching. I hated it immediately. I was the school interpreter. Cause I was only Spanish speaker. I was young. I
wow.
decided to teach
In
high
the
school.
whole school.
Yeah, well, we had a Spanish, we had 2 Spanish teachers. But I was a special education teacher, right? So they
my
would pull me,
goodness.
I was easier to pull out to,
I understand. I gotcha.
for it. And so
Wow. Talk about wearing a lot of hats and getting snagged in
yeah,
a lot of. Whew.
and young, right? Because I was
Yes.
20. I graduated college 22. So I was 22-year-old teaching high school. My kids were from 14 to 18. I was still learning like what it's like to be an adult,
Of course.
And
I'm sorry. Have you figured it out yet? Because like I'm in my
Hell no.
30s and I haven't. I'm just
hell no.
just like we're all on the same page, right?
No,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
I don't know when we're gonna figure it out. But I knew that I wanted to do more. And I was in the car with my mom and we were driving to Raleigh or something. And I was like on LinkedIn and I saw this position that said nonprofit organization looking for lead teacher, director, Spanish immersion. And I was like, okay, I speak Spanish. I'm in education. Fuck it. I'm going to apply. Like, cause I want to get out of here. Like,
Yes.
I don't want to work here, but I knew I wanted to stay in education. I knew I wanted it to be, that I wanted to keep supporting my community. And I wasn't quite doing that when I was in the school system. And I made a lot of mistakes, you know?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, and you're in the school system too. And I, for a very short stint, this was more during like clinical internship stuff in my world, but did school adjustment counseling or school counseling. And I feel like no matter what your position is at the school, it's just you're constantly putting out fires. You're constantly getting pulled in 1,000 different directions. There's never enough people to attend to all the needs in terms of like the student teacher ratio or what have you.
That's right.
So I can definitely empathize and like understand where you're coming from with this idea of like, I want to make a difference and I'm not going to be able to do that here.
Yeah, no. And it was like, I think UNCG, and I will always say this, I think UNCG had, and for like out of state folks, the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, they had just an amazing education, special education department. And they really told you can make a difference through education, right? So like while we were in school, there was just this, I just knew that I was going to make a difference in education. And I think it was that experience and that knowledge and that fire that those particular professors and that experience put in me that allowed me to say, you know what, I know that I can find something to make a difference in education. And so I applied. And mind you, at that time, while I think I speak Spanish fairly well, at that time, it was like way worse because like my first language was Spanish, but I mean, I grew up in the US. So I had what we would call a very gringa accent, very like just, like when I go to Puerto Rico, I am not Puerto Rican. When I'm here, like, oh yeah, she's Latina, like, but what Spanish does she speak kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I applied and they offered me the job. And I remember, I was like, man, these people are crazy. Like I was like, I have no experience.
Like, do they know what they're doing?
I was like, I got no experience in nonprofit. I literally have only 3 years of education experience, like actually in education. I've never been a Spanish teacher. I don't know how to teach Spanish. The only thing I have is, well, not the only thing, right? But what I do have is I have a passion for my community. I have the language and I have the education. So I'm like, okay, at least I got those 3 things.
And that was enough.
That is so much though. Like you,
right? She was minimizing it. And it's like, that's so much. That is so much to offer a community. And
like,
I hate this.
Imagine somebody with 10, 15, 20 years experience and no passion. Like I'll take you every day. You have the passion and maybe not as much experience. Cool. We can figure it out together. But like, if you don't have that fire and that like desire and drive to want to do the thing, then like get out of my room. I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Right. Also, just the
for
fact
sure.
that you genuinely, going back to that authenticity piece with leadership, I think that's a huge part. Like from the get-go, no matter if you were 22 or not, you have always been a very, very authentic person. And I believe that, especially whenever you talk about community and how important community is to you, I believe, you know, that probably stood out to a person in a heartbeat during this interview process.
It was such a and you know, we'll probably get into that. Like it was just to your point, like minimizing who we are. We do that, right? We do, a lot of us do that, and that goes to that imposter syndrome, right? Definition, and or that feeling of inadequacy that you're just like, I'm not good enough for this. But you know, I was like, I'm going to take this leap of faith anyways. And I remember even yesterday or when we were talking about this, I was like, I remember the principal when I told her that I was resigning, asking me, well, like, why would you do that? Do they even have insurance? And I was like, yeah, they have health insurance. I had no idea what kind of benefits I was getting. I just knew I needed to go. And I knew that I was getting a couple $1,000 more than I was making teaching at the time. And I said, you know what? Insurance or not, like, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna go for it.
Right.
And I did. And I've been here 8 years and 8 months. And
that's right. That's incredible. Can you imagine if you actually listened to that principal of the school who was trying to kind of silence that part of your inner voice and passion that was like screaming to get out?
Yeah.
Do you ever like want to call that principal and say, hey, do you remember that conversation we had? Like, I just wanted to fill you in on where this took me. Like,
well, it's funny because like, I Google myself often. Just to see what kind of pops up. And I think to myself, and not just, you know, principals, but just people that have been in my life, like, go ahead and look me up. Okay. Go ahead. Because
look at that long list, right? Go ahead and look at this long list of achievements.
So like a part of me is always like those people that, you know, might have, and my partner likes to say, you know, light dimmers. Those people that want to dim or did want to dim my light, I know that my name has crossed their computer, their phone, something, because, you know, I think karma's a bitch. So,
yeah. And like,
life lesson.
I think that so many times, and I know oftentimes in my life, people have told me I couldn't do things, or I wasn't good enough to do something, or I didn't have XYZ to be able to apply for whatever position. And I remember several instances where I listened to them and I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm not good enough. This isn't the spot for me.
Yeah.
And I know the pivotal point in my life where I was like, you know what? Fuck that. I can do this. I don't care if I don't have it on paper. Like, we're going to figure it out because you're coachable. You have the passion, you have the desire, and you have certain tools and things in your wheelhouse that make you uniquely you. So
that's right.
Like,
textbook is not
stop.
Right. Textbook is not the end all be all. Absolutely.
No, it is not. It is not. And for the people listening, stop being light dimmers. Like, if somebody comes to you with a big idea and it scares you because of some insecurity within you, keep your trap shut.
That's right. That's right.
And I get off my soapbox now.
No, but it's so true, right? Because like, I feel like, you know, and we we're just talking about this today as a team, that oftentimes we don't see, because of our experiences, we don't see what we're capable of sometimes, right? And it takes that one person to be able to see further in you than you can even see in yourself, right? And like, that's my particular style of leading and my particular style of even hiring has always been, it's not about what's on your resume. I mean, your resume, like, okay, I'm going to look at it, but like the experience on it, none of that matters. It's that interview when I ask you why, like, what is your why for this? It's that passion piece. When people are like, what is it about like that person that made you? And I was like, honestly, it's just the feeling that I got when we talked about why this work was important for them. And not the job, the work, because the job can change, but the work, you know? And I really do believe that each and every one of us have those abilities in us that we haven't even seen yet. Right. And so like, it takes folks to develop those. And sometimes it shows up in a way of like teaching everything you don't want to be, to see what you know,
That's
that,
right.
Yeah,
That's
or,
right.
Mhm.
you know, having someone that actually motivates you and pushes you in a positive way to say, you know what, you can do more. Right. And that's kind of
Absolutely.
my style.
Yes.
I love
And
that.
actually, you commented on something that I'd like to come back to around when people kind of have this preconceived notion of maybe who you are or how you're going to show up in the world, especially as a person of color. I'm kind of curious, especially with the organization where you work for, and if you'd like to share the name of the organization,
Yeah.
you're welcome to. But I'd love for you to comment on what the misconceptions were of this organization that you stumbled upon when you entered this new world of nonprofit, and sort of like set the record straight. Like, let's talk
Yeah.
about what the misconceptions were and what is the reality.
Yeah, so I have been so honored and privileged to be able to work for Isla NC. So it's a nonprofit organization based out of the Triangle. And our mission is to build community and leadership through Spanish immersion and culture immersion programs. And what does that mean? Right? Like, that's a lot. Like,
That's a
culture
mouthful.
immersion,
Yeah, what
it
does that
is,
mean?
right? Community immersion, language, what? But what it is from the beginning, it was supposed to be this heritage language program, which is particularly for Latino students, Latino children where their parents come from a Latin American country, to come and learn Spanish. That was and build their literacy skills in their native language. That was the initial idea for Isla. And what I always got in the beginning was, why are you teaching? And this is quote, like, I'm going to say exactly how I would get it. Why are you teaching Spanish kids Spanish? Shouldn't you be teaching them English? And I'd look at them and I'd be like, no, this is exactly why we exist. We actually should be talking about the importance of bilingualism, looking at the Spanish language, that is the second most spoken language in the country, as an asset, not a deficit. And so, like, when we, think about culture and community, there's this, what I always talk about community cultural wealth. Like, our society doesn't open our eyes to that. We see a different as a bad thing versus different being a good thing, right?
Right. And there you go in this position, right, of trying to explain yourself. And this is where I think many people of color, especially in leadership positions, where that working harder piece comes in, is that because half of your job is actually providing the education to your colleagues who just don't get it.
Yeah. And for years, I mean, so I started in 2013. So I would say easy the first 3 to 5 years, it was this constant having to explain why the work we were doing was so important. And looking at, like, having to talk about how you can take, the skills learned in one language and transfer that to your second, third, fourth language, and how early language development is actually more beneficial in the long run. How, like, yes, you may see a setback in reading development or even speaking development because a child is trying to figure out how to use two parts of a brain that monolinguals don't use. So you're mad that I have 5 words in English, but I really have double because I have it also, those 5 words also in Spanish, right? So, like, or in any other language, but we're, I'm going to stick to Spanish since that's what I work in. But it's challenging the piece of, like, how do you, in the nonprofit sector more than anything, how do you explain to folks who are providing funds, who are donating, who we're supposed to keep this business running, right? Because nonprofits are a business, and they don't understand. So for 5 years of our existence, a lot of people didn't believe in what we were doing. Oh, really? So it was really fighting that. But throughout that whole time, I think I just knew. And even now, like, in the nonprofit sector, there's ups and downs, of all kinds of things. And I just know that the work we are doing is so important that there's no way we could fail.
Yeah.
There's just not. Like, I'm just
not
what
an
a
option.
beautiful statement. What a beautiful statement. And I'm wondering, now that you've been involved with this organization for 8 years.
Yep.
So I wonder for those high level stakeholders, for those lawmakers, for those people who generally tend to be of the majority population, which is typically Caucasian and male. How does a woman of color then advocate and empower and educate these stakeholders to say, yes, I see the why, I see the value, and we should be allocating more funds to this organization?
Whew. So
I know it's
that's
a loaded one.
Question, friend.
and especially, I mean, let's see how much I get into this, but there is a court case documentary that just actually came out in North Carolina yesterday or Wednesday on Leandro. So there's a case in North Carolina that's been going on for 30 plus years around the money allocations in North Carolina to education.
That's right.
But I to actually answer the question before I get into like policy, I think that one of the things is that for me is really important. It's about the collective power, right? So so one of the biggest things that I think has been used against community for hundreds of years and all types of communities is making sure that we keep communities separate, right? That we don't actually build power, collective power in people, right? And so for me, what's most important is to educate the community I work with and to show them that they actually have all of the tools. They have all of the right to the best quality education in this country, right? So the more people that know that, when you start seeing within your experience, within your child's experience, that it is not, they're not receiving the quality education that they have a right to, a constitutional right to, I could raise my hand and say, now I am empowered enough, and I know that I have that right to say, this ain't working. So if I do that, my neighbor does that, my neighbor across the street does that, what happens? There's collective power. You build an army. Exactly. And those lawmakers that have been up there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, either you're going to listen to your constituents or you need to move out of the way. Right. And so that's what's starting to happen. So it's not about like, I mean, I could, and I think that documentary specifically, Leandro has been in the education conversation in North Carolina for many years.
I was going to say 2 decades.
Yeah, way too long.
Yeah.
And
can you comment on what that is, just for people who are not from North Carolina?
Yeah. So the Leandro case was a case brought forward by 5 different counties in North Carolina, saying that the education system in North Carolina was not meeting the North Carolina Constitution of providing a sound education to all students in North Carolina, right? And so there was 3 particular buckets that they were looking at: trained teachers, quality principals, and then adequate resources for schools. And so this was brought on because of a student. So there were students listed in the court case, and one of them, and I think it was the first one listed, last name was Leandro, or maybe it was his first name. Now I'm forgetting exactly which order, but Leandro is part of this person's name, and he's from Holt County. And so it's Leandro versus the state of North Carolina. And so they, in 2018, the judge ordered for there to be an outside group to come look at the state of education in North Carolina. So they did this evaluation.
An independent one, in theory, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was called the West Ed. And what they found was that we were doing worse than when the actual lawsuit even had
been filed.
Worse. So then our Governor Cooper, he said, well, and in the West Ed report, it said that what the state needed to do was invest X amount of dollars into the education system in North Carolina. And so they highlighted key areas. English language learners was one of them. Students with disabilities was another. Students in rural areas, racial discrimination was another one. And low income students was another bucket. And it got to the governor made a budget, and then it turned into this whole thing where our lawmakers did not want to support fully funding Leandro and do not want to fully fund Leandro. So, there's all these discussions about that money doesn't fix things, blah, 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 this back and forth. But at the end of the day, you have, first of all, teachers aren't paid what they deserve in the state of North Carolina. We are
God, no.
True story. Yeah.
I mean, just horrible.
It's actually so bad. For those of y'all listening, the pay for teachers in North Carolina is disgusting. As someone who is from North Carolina and then relocated to Massachusetts, and you see how it's done in Massachusetts, where it's more like, I mean, they're like a paragon of how it should be. It just absolutely insane.
Right. And so this court case, really just really shows us how, your lawmakers, one, have a lot of power into the quality of education, right? But at the same time, I think it is starting to show us that we need to get new people in positions of power that, right? That make those decisions.
Time
and
to
we
clean
need to
house.
hold them exactly. And we have to hold lawmakers accountable for the quality of education that they are not giving our students in our school districts.
Right.
And so, I could talk about that for days.
Oh, I love it. I love that you're getting
it.
into this though, because, something that you and I had touched on previously is just how each one of our roles uniquely touch also these lives of children who are in need of IEPs and 504s within the school system. And, I can only imagine on your end when you are working with individuals who are not originally from the United States and they're learning a second language. Do they understand the documents they're signing off on or being asked to sign off on or being told, because I mean, just as someone who sat in on a lot of IEP and 504 meetings, it can be so intimidating for parents who are born and raised in the United States because they don't even understand what's being told to them in these meetings. And you're circled by 5, 6, 7 administrative staff or teachers who are telling you, yes, this is what you need to do for your child. So you want to believe them. You don't want to believe that there's some kind of stuff behind the scenes, such as i.e. funding and how you want to reallocate the budget in some way. You don't want to think that that's possibly influencing the feedback the teachers are giving you as a parent about how you should care for your kids' educational needs.
Well, or the lack of resources to really engage families in the journey and in the process of education, right? So I think that when specifically when we think about that situation, the biggest problem is language access, right? But then there's another layer of this cultural competency. When we talk about communities who are born and raised in another country, a totally different education system, they come to this country for a better life, for better education, for better opportunity. So they say, you know what? I believe whatever you tell me that I'm supposed to do to make sure that my kids receive the best education possible, I'm going to listen and I'm going to sign that paper and I'm going to give him that service. Right. But what we, particularly in Isla, one of our programs is our Isla Padres. And in there, we really work with parents on identifying that they have those leadership skills, right? They have the advocacy skills and what are their rights, and that, yes, this country has a great education system, right? It's true. We have a good education system. However, it's not always what you think it is. And so you actually need to know what is your right. So when you notice that, wait a second, my child does not have a learning disability. It's actually a language issue. I could say, hey, I don't think my child should be in a special education class. I think he needs to be receiving language services. Or my child doesn't have a language problem. My child actually, I think, has a learning disability. Can we get him tested for an actual learning disability? Or can you even inform me on what learning disabilities are? But when you don't have a system that invests in the quality education to meet the community needs, which in the state of North Carolina, the Latino population, the Latino community is growing across the state, and you're not providing Spanish-speaking people in your district, you're not providing information in both languages. I mean, it took the pandemic to happen for the State Department, the Health State
Yep.
Department, to provide information in Spanish on a wide, on a wide, what
Mhm.
the fuck? Like,
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
yeah,
unacceptable.
this is a what the fox moment right here.
Yes.
Absolutely.
so, it's
true.
It's really, part of what my job is and what my role is like, we talk about empowerment, we talk about leadership and all of those things, but most importantly, it's about really building that community cultural wealth and that collective power to know that, what, change does need to happen. And change starts with us coming together and
Yeah.
saying, I'm sorry, you've been here way too long, feeding me a bunch of bullshit. You need to move out the way,
When it comes back to that, like full circle comes back to that empowerment piece of the very same way you were sitting in that principal's office and they were trying to dim your light. Now you're giving an opportunity to, fan the flames for these folks and do the exact opposite of what was done to you. And I think on a grand scale, that's an amazing opportunity for the community. And it's something that is going to be the change maker and the difference maker so that folks can stand up and advocate, hey, you're not giving me the things I need to be successful. I am here and I am asking you, and here's the things that I require to be able to move this forward.
Yeah.
And just that empowerment piece is incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And something that I had asked Jenice previously, or like to kind of go over or identify a few traits that make a person a leader. Because I think so much of the time we really get that word twisted and what it means. And I mentioned this as well, as like, especially with the Ukraine Russia war or conflict, whatever you want to call it, going on, people have talked so much about the president of Ukraine being such a fierce leader and being the essence of leadership. And so I'd like to hear a little bit on your take about what leadership comprises of. What does that look like? A good leader.
So I think that leadership, we get what leadership is confused a lot. And I think, historically it's like the CEO, the president, all the different, the person that's running the entire company. But I think that
the person with power, so to speak. The person
with power. Yes. Thank you. But really, I think true leadership is where you are more of the facilitator, right? Like you sit there and you watch and you support and you move and you help and what are those missing things, right? What is it that you need? And every single one of us, I believe, leadership in them, right? It's just the type of leader that you want to be. And for like, I don't see a leader, like, I guess I'm in a leadership role, right? However, I think that the community I serve is my leader, right? Like I follow what my community's needs are, what I work for and with my community, right? And that for me is part of my leadership, right? And what leadership means. Leadership does not have anything to do with power. Leadership has to do with listening, looking, watching, and knowing, and opening yourself to learning. Because so many times leaders are, I have all the answers, or people, I know everything. That's bullshit. Not true leadership. It is.
Correct.
It's like, if you're a leader and you do not say every day to yourself that I learned something new, you're not a true leader. You're just not. And I think that, for some of us, it's that we're just not giving ourselves time to think and reflect, right? To notice those things on a daily basis. But I think true leaders really do take a step back and say, what did I learn today from somebody else? Or what did I, how am I going to change that? Or it's okay to fall flat on my face and start over, right? Yeah. It's the starting over, like falling and getting your ass back up and starting all over again, knowing that you don't have to do it alone. That's if you're working in true community, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like society's always told us that in order to be a leader, you have to know all the things. You have to be an expert. You have to have, money, power, all the things. And I love what you said, that a leader, in my mind, and the way it translated for me, is a leader is only as good as the team that they have with them, not behind them. Nope. Truly your subject matter experts, your panel of people who are actually boots on the ground, front lines, however you want to think about it. And that those are folks that you're taking time to step back and listen from. And those are the folks that you're allowing them and empowering them to step into their own leadership roles, even if it's not, CEO or whatever the traditional idea was. And I think it's important because we all have that. We have that ability to step into that leadership role and be a change maker in whatever space we're in.
That's right. And I think that's the thing, big or small, right? Because I think people think of leadership of you're doing this big old thing. No, to me, leadership is even a small, and it's not even small. It's picking up the phone and calling a school and saying, I want a parent teacher conference. That's leadership.
Yes.
Right. Picking up, saying, you know what, and I want this to be monthly. That's leadership. Or I'm going to share with my neighbor across the street what I learned today for their child too, so that they know. That's leadership, right? And we so oftentimes get stuck in our own heads where it's easier to work independently. It's easier to say, oh, I got the answer. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I don't we could just move on to the next thing. Or I planned out this whole year. It's easier to do that alone. But the truth of the matter is like, if real change there's not a single moment in history where change happened that didn't include a bunch of people.
It's not in a vacuum. You can't create change in a vacuum. And also, like, I feel like what I'm hearing you say, Jenice, is like, for you, leadership means allowing your community to guide your path. It means allowing your community members to guide, where you want to help steer the ship, so to speak, or what is it that they need more advocacy skills, or how can they apply transferable skills to this situation or that situation.
Yeah. And it's, for me, that's really, from the very beginning, because I said when we talked about how it started, I didn't have the knowledge, the background in nonprofit in this particular space. But more importantly, I had a lot of privileges that the community that I work with and work for, have to go through that I don't have to go through. My parents were Puerto Rican. They were born, with citizenship. Never had issues with mixed status in my home. I'm working with families that have mixed statuses, right? And that feel like they don't belong. And sometimes Isla is and was the only place where they felt like, wow, I'm home. I'm around other people. I belong. And that's such a huge part of how we survive, right? As humans, is we're longing for that sense of belonging. So imagine being in a space 24/7 where you're told that you don't belong here, right? Like that is a trauma that keeps accumulating. And then what do you do, right? And so my hope is that through listening to the community, it has always been listening to the community, letting the community guide my work, that I really was and am creating a space or facilitating a space where people feel like they are home, a piece of home through their language, and proud of where their family comes from, where their kids or where their parents come from, what their language, and see language as a benefit and their cultural pride, and see themselves and say, you know what? I'm going to be the next president of the United States. I'm going to be the next congressman. I'm going to be the next superintendent. I'm going to be the next teacher, have more of that representation, because now we haven't dimmed anyone's light to say you don't belong. The complete opposite. Now you're going to tell other people to shut the F up because I do belong here. You know what I'm saying? I realized how much I cursed in here. And like, if I shared, I was like, man, let me stop cursing so much.
Well, in case you didn't know, this podcast is actually rated explicit. So you're in good company, my dear. Yes. You're in good company.
Good.
It's part of life. And when we get passionate about things, like those words just kind of come up,
Yeah.
They do.
I tend to drop a few F-bombs here and there. No shame, girl.
No.
Just kind of hearing as you talk about this, I just think I'm so proud of you, just to know you, to be your friend, to just have you as someone I look at like, man, this woman is absolutely a leader in so many different ways. Because I think about, as you were talking about at the beginning, about just being a woman of color in a leadership position, that's a really lonely space to be in for the most part, because it's not as common as it should be in this day and age. And so for you, yet, thank you.
That's right.
So for you to be in this space where you're kind of like alone, you didn't really have your sense of belonging, so to speak, in
That's
this
right.
space. And then to pivot and keep moving, keep enduring, keep doing your thing, and excelling at that. Now you've created an entire advocacy department where you work. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I even within that, right? Like I acknowledge those privileges that I have. Like I am a white Latina. Like, so I know that, I know that my experience is still very different from other folks and other women of color that, it's that they could feel it even more intensely or more like, wait, well, you could kind of go through certain spaces. Like, so I acknowledge that. Right. But I think for me, within Isla, I think from the very beginning, I knew that it was important. It's not about for me, it's not just about the language part, right? It is about the tools that we develop with our kids that we serve. We've served hundreds of kids through our heritage language program, hundreds of parents through our parent programs, parent workshops. And this advocacy department has been a long time coming because, and I try not to get into politics because, like, of course, that's this whole mess, but education is political, right?
It
Like
is.
it is. And so I couldn't keep like, oh no, I'm not going there, because it was such a pivotal part of our families knowing their rightful place in society and knowing that, no, you do deserve what you want here. And your kids should not get less of an education just because their last name is Ramirez, or just because their first language is Spanish, or just because you just came to this country, right? Like none of those things should be barriers. And I mean, legally, right, there are court cases in history that say that cannot be a barrier to quality education. So I within the advocacy department here in Isla, we really are putting our, walking the walk, in my opinion, because it's not Jenice coming up with curriculum and doing these leadership classes and advocacy classes. It's not Natalia or any of the other team doing it. It's our parents having the voice and being part of the development, saying that this is a need that they have, being the teacher. So once, they go to train, they train the other teachers or the other parents and so forth. And we are now in a network of people, of a collective. So it's such it's a beautiful thing to watch happen. And it's a dream come true, really, because 8 years ago, who knew that we'd be where we are today, having parent researchers like in the community, documenting information, uplifting voices, putting in resolutions at school boards, saying, nope, I demand this, like changes, I knew, but like, who knew it'd be 8 years later? Like,
well, you certainly didn't know that sitting in the principal's office being told not to take the job. So,
right.
But you've been kicking ass and taking names, and I am proud as hell of you. So I'm so glad that you were able to join us today on What the Fox. And I would love to just kind of conclude by having you share just one big idea or takeaway that you would like this audience to take away from today's episode and your story and what you've decided to share today.
I think that you didn't tell me you were going to ask me this. Like now
we have to throw curveballs. It
I
can't be
mean,
completely planned.
So I think that, I talk about leadership. I believe very strongly in leadership. And I think the one thing I would ask people is to really think about how do they want to show up in the world, right? Like what do you see as a leader? And then try to see what are those qualities that you have? And don't look at it like, oh, I need to be here to be a leader. No, what are those qualities that you have to really shake shit up and make a change that you need, that you see that needs to happen in the world? That for me is what I would hope. And I hope when meet me and, we get to talk about things like this, they're like, I wonder what kind of leader am I actually? Like, what are those qualities that I have? I hope that happens. And so whoever listens to the whole thing, right? Because they could start it and be like, this girl is boring as hell. Let's just move on.
They're going to stay to the end. They're going to love you just like we do.
Let's move on. But I hope that they really do just take a minute and reflect on who they are and how do they want to show up.
I love that.
And I'm really proud to be a mom, of a beautiful little girl. And I hope that, I'm making her proud. And so that for me is important.
Yeah, you're one hell of a role model, that's for sure. And speaking of your little girl, I know that we had discussed kind of the airtime of today's episode, and there was a specific day that you wanted to kind of acknowledge and bring awareness to for our listeners. I wonder if you'd like to mention that.
Yes. So in April, in Mexico, we celebrate I believe it's actually internationally, in Latin America, El Día del Niño, which is at the end of April. And I believe it's the 31st. And so, take a time to appreciate children and learn a little bit about the differences and the way it's celebrated across Latin American countries. I think that would just be amazing.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for spending time with us today.
It's
been a joy to get to know you. And I know, I already know you're going to be back and we're going to talk about more things and we're going to get to celebrate some really excellent stuff with you over the coming years, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I was so excited. I was like, I'm going to behave. And of course, like I said, the F-bombs,
girl,
kick you off.
Anyone who goes to Twatfest, they don't know how to behave nicely in public.
That's true. That is true. I did say I just shake shit up,
Well-behaved women rarely make history. So we are not well-behaved women here.
I was going to say, I think we're doing great. We're doing great.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much. It has been a joy, and we will see y'all next Tuesday.
Yes. Bye.
And we all sing, everything is gonna be just fine. It's gonna fall into place. The sun is gonna set on your terrible day.